Go ahead.
So thank you so much, guys, for having me, for organizing this event. Thank you to the folks from CUNY on strike that organized and put together the event. Also, I wanted to share with you how happy I am that I'm able to have a conversation with people that are organizing towards better conditions in CUNY, for free CUNY, better contract for the students and the faculty members and workers. And I'm also very happy to be here having a conversation with folks organizing for Palestine in a movement that has been harshly repressed in the universities especially. So it's a honor for me to have a chance to talk to you guys, and thanks for coming. So I know folks are very eager to know about the assemblies. That's what I'm here, I guess. And because you have challenges ahead regarding your own organizing. So I'm gonna try to divide my intervention in three: the context, the historical context, but just a little bit, so we don't spend that much time on that. So if you have questions afterwards, please feel free to bring them up. Then I'm gonna focus on the assemblies as part of the development of the movement and self-organization. And I'm gonna stop a little bit on that so you can get a sense of how they work and how powerful they were. And then I'm gonna talk about the politics of the movement, right? Because it's not only about organizing, it's also about organizing with politics, right? So yeah, I'm gonna do my best to not talk too much. So I'm gonna set the timer here, guys. I'm sorry, I'm just, okay. So this is 1999 in Mexico, a long time ago. And Mexico was ruled by a single party, the PRI, right? It was the party that was in power from the early 20s to the 2000s, one single party. We didn't have a full dictatorship, but it was a very authoritarian regime, very authoritarian government, where, for example, elections were always a fraud, political parties were illegal. There was only one opposition party, and it was a right-wing party connected to the church, the PAN. And this government, this regime, was especially harsh and especially repressive towards the vanguard, the movements within the 20th century in Mexico, okay? So people hated this government a lot because they repressed harshly the teachers' struggles, they repressed harshly the peasants' struggles, the working class struggles, and the youth was severely repressed also. For example, rock festivals were were forbidden in Mexico. I grew up in a context where it was very difficult for the youth to have access to public spaces, etc. It was a very repressive government, okay? So this is 99. Neoliberalism is settling down in Mexico. The so-called neoliberal period or offensive started around the early 90s. The NAFTA, the agreement between US imperialism and Canada and Mexico, started in 1994. So the NAFTA, by 1999, the NAFTA already meant for thousands of peasants the bankruptcy of they lost their lands. The whole Mexican countryside went to bankruptcy because all the good land were delivered to the corporations, mostly US corporations. That's why right now in Mexico we don't have the corn that we produce is not the original corn from Mexico, because we depend on the US corn, which is so precious because we're called the children of the corn, we Mexicans. But it shows like the imperialist penetration. So the NAFTA started in 1994, and as you probably know, the Zapatista rebellion erupted in 1994. The indigenous communities from the southern Mexico, from a southern state in Mexico, Chiapas, started a rebellion, And at the beginning, one of the main demands that these indigenous communities had was against the NAFTA, because it was affecting their communal lands, etc. Okay? So in this context, in 1999, the university was also more working class than it is right now, right? Because the children of the working class were still able. It's not only about paying fees or not, it's also about, for example, if you need to work when you're 18 years old, you probably don't have time for like the same tragedy that the children of the working class have in New York and elsewhere, right? So in 1999, the university was still, I don't want to say all the children of the working class, no, of course not, but it had a very working class composition. And the deacon on those days, we're going to call him Barnes, okay, that's the last name of this guy, Barnes. This guy on the university was always, guys, an institution that was controlled by the PRI, okay? There was no democratic bodies, and the PRI had like hegemony within the university, right? So this deacon, Chancellor, Chancellor. Yeah. Okay, is the main, the main, the principal figure of the university. How do you call it? Chancellor. So the chancellor announced that from now on the university was not able to fill the necessities of research and science and education, so they needed to charge a fee of $60. Okay, the university in Mexico is free. It has been free because there was a huge revolution, the Mexican Revolution in 1910. So in the imaginary of the people, the education must be free, right? People shouldn't pay for their education. So the university was free. I mean, we were paying on those days 20 cents of a peso. I cannot translate that to dollars because it's almost non-existent. But we were paying 2 cents of a peso, and now I think they are still like paying like 25 cents of a peso. It's just symbolic, and if you don't pay it, it's okay. You know what I'm saying? So it was a free university, and the chancellor tried to impose the fee of $60, an increase of $60 per student. Okay, so immediately after the rumors spread out and people were aware that this was happening, immediately after, I'm talking about late February of 1999, the student movement did what we usually do in Mexico, which is to get together in assemblies, which is a tradition that we learned from the student movement in 1968, right? In 1968, where there was this international uprising of the youth. I cannot talk about this right now, but it's a tradition that we learned from them. And this student in 1968 is a tradition that they recuperated from the working class, the Mexican working class, that developed some trends of self-organization in the 30s and in the 50s, okay? So immediately after we heard that they were going to charge fees, we organized assemblies, right? And the assemblies are spaces. They are not spaces only for activists that are already organized. Our assemblies are not only for political organizations. They are not only for union representatives. Our assemblies traditionally are composed by they are open. We make sure that we set up the assemblies in a time that people can attend. There's open mic, usually, okay? And all the people that are already organized, union members, members of political organizations, attend the assembly with hundreds and hundreds of rank and filers. In that moment, the assemblies were huge because people were very concerned because the chancellor wanted to impose this fee, right? And he was going to do it secretively, in a special session of what we call the University Council, which is a body of the university that is absolutely anti-democratic, okay? So the assemblies started gathering more and more people. I think that by early April, we already had assemblies probably everywhere, meaning the 13 faculties of the university and probably around between 10 and 14 schools, okay? The schools, the UNAM has a very spread out system of high schools and even middle schools. It has one middle school or two, if I remember well. So these schools were already having their own assemblies, okay? In that assemblies, the rank and file, the leader, right, developed, a plan to fight back against the fees. So we started with big demonstrations, huge demonstrations. We would get together outside the building of the office of the chancellor. We would go to the central square of the capital. We would have like massive, when I'm saying massive, I'm talking about cientos de miles, hundreds of thousands, like a lot of students were against the fee, okay? So by April, even though the student movement was already kind of strong, we knew that the chancellor was going to move forward with the plan, okay? So there was a real threat, okay? So the plan that the assemblies discussed was to, first of all, to set up a poll to ask all the students, even the students that were not attending the assemblies, to ask everyone if they agree with the $6 fee, and if they didn't agree, to vote in favor of striking the university, shutting down the university, okay? So the assemblies put together this poll, and by April, after the chancellor said that he was going to move forward with the $6 fee, the assemblies were transformed into strike committees, okay? Into strike committees. And I'm gonna stop here to explain how does that look like, okay? So you already have assemblies in each faculty, which means, for example, in each department, let's say at CUNY, English, math, geography, right? So every faculty had its own assembly, the schools as well, and these assemblies would meet, they will meet every week, okay? And every week they would discuss their ideas, their concerns regarding the movement, what to do, what not to do, right? They would vote 5 delegates per assembly, because every single assembly had representation at this general council, okay? General council that got together every week to discuss based on the resolutions from the assembly, okay? So imagine this, you have 14 schools and you have 13 faculties spread out in 7 campuses, with a central campus in the university, which is a beautiful campus that you should visit whenever you can. In a central campus that every week we're discussing, what are we gonna do? Okay, for example, so the high school number 1, because we have numbers for the UNAM high school. The high school number 1 think that we have the proposal to mobilize to the Department of Labor because we wanna complain about, I don't know, a labor thing that was happening in that moment, okay? Or the assembly from the school number 3 is proposing to mobilize in solidarity with the Indonesian people. On those days, there was a huge uprising happening in Indonesia, so to speak, okay? So all those proposals and resolutions would be put together in a paper, okay? And 5 people were voted delegates. These 5 people could be, were revocable and rotative, okay? Every week they will vote new delegates. That doesn't mean, sometimes you would vote the same delegate because he did a good job, or they did a good job, okay? So the delegates would come with their votes. Once the student movement decided that there was not going, it was not like we could not step back, and the fees were going to impose. With the help of this massive poll that the assemblies put together and the voting in the assemblies, we decided to go on a strike, to put the university on a strike, okay? To strike the university, which means to shut down all the campuses we could. Not all the buildings were shut down. For example, the research institutes were not shut down, especially because the right-wing sector of the academic bureaucracy was there. Also because research had their own necessities, but you can still have a strike with laboratories working and everything. It was more political, the problem, but almost all the institutions were shut down, okay? So once we decided to strike, the assemblies transformed into strike committees, and they would work the same way, okay? They would discuss weekly, and they would send delegates to the general strike council, okay? Why this was so important, guys? Because, and the student movement decided all together what exactly was going to look like the platform they were going to fight for, right? What was going to be the unity point that was going to unify the general council, strike council, in order to fight the authorities and so on. And the students voted 6 points, okay, of our platform. The first point was no fees. The second point was access to everyone, meaning to cut off an agreement that the university had with a private corporation that was, with a private company that was in charge of like setting up the exams that the students have to present in order to access the university. We didn't want the exam because the exam was unfair for the working class kids that came from public schools in comparison with the kids that came from private schools, for example. So we didn't want the exam. We were demanding dismantling the repressive apparatus of the university, meaning all the ways the university had to surveillance the students and repress the students and so on. The student movement voted to organize a university congress to reshape, to rediscuss, to transform the constitution of the university in order to democratize it. And democratize it means bodies, okay? And the last demand was to have every single conversation with the authorities we were demanding to be public and open to everyone. TV recorded, transmitted on TV, and open to everyone that wanted to go, okay? Those were the 6 points that unified the movement, okay? Now, from the point of view of maintaining the strike, guys, an aspect that every strike has that this is not accurate, okay? But I'm gonna use this term because it's useful, the social reproduction of the strike. Why the assemblies were so important. The assemblies were in charge of the barricades that were shutting down the doors of the university, the big entrances, etc., 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 okay? The assemblies, so for example, we would have brigades every single night on guard in every single entrance of the university, okay? The assemblies were in charge, for example, to get the food we were going to eat and do the cooking and do the cleaning, right, of the buildings and all that. The assemblies were in charge of, for example, sometimes political education. So some assemblies would have political education about the Chinese Revolution or the student movement in Argentina or whatever. The assemblies were in charge also, when the repression started, of organize the security in the marches. Who's the people that is going to be democratically voted in order to take care of the contingents against the police and all that, right? The assemblies were in charge, for example, we would have brigades. Can you let me know before 10 minutes, before the half an hour? You know what I mean, 10 minutes before the half an hour? Okay. The assemblies were in charge of getting money to pay to do the groceries and all that. So we would go very early in the morning in brigades of 6 students. It was a whole day of political agitation and getting money and support from the population. We would go on the subway. We didn't have social media. That didn't exist. So we rode in the subway Some of us would like agitate in the subway why we were striking, why the people should support the strike. People would like clap, or people would fight back. So sometimes we had these like small assemblies in the subway with the people. We would go to the factories, especially the people that were more convinced that the strike had to unify with the workers. We would have brigades that outside the factories supporting workers' struggles, etc., etc. The brigades also would go to markets. Markets in Mexico are not like here, not supermarkets, but popular markets in the neighborhoods, and people would go there and agitate. So everywhere in the city, there was a member of the General Council of Strike agitating the fairness of our struggle. And we got a lot of support. We got a lot of money and a lot of support, so those brigades would come back to the buildings, to the schools, with whatever they got. So we were in charge so the assemblies were in charge of a bunch of those things, guys. In the UNAM strike, we had people that had kids, for example, people that, okay? Now, the assemblies at the same time were open to everyone, and our political fight was for the union to take up the strike. The union did not. So that doesn't mean the workers were not supportive. A bunch of workers that didn't find representation through the union came to the assemblies and were part of the struggle. Some workers were actually arrested when the military police occupied the university, etc. But we didn't get the union to be fully part of the strikes, which has meant, guys, a very, very important escalation of the strike and the possibility to transform the university from its roots. We didn't have that. But at the same time, guys, we did have a bunch, the General Council sessions, we got together indigenous from the South that were like going through their own struggles, peasant organizations, unions, other unions that were supportive, even though, again, the union bureaucracies didn't want to escalate the strike, so they didn't put efforts, right, into unify with the student movement, okay? Now, the thing is, the self-organization was also the decision-making process, okay? And this is very important, guys, because to be very concrete, for example, in 99, it was until December 1999 that the authorities of the university, after a bunch of like back and forth and gaze for the movement, but also for the authorities, that they opened the first public bargaining, so to speak, public bargaining, right? It's from April to December, okay? After repression, a bunch of things happened that unfortunately I cannot develop it today. But it was December when the first public bargaining was called, and the strength we got to impose that those bargaining sessions were open. The TV was there. Of course, we didn't get the main like TV channels, but we did get the government channel that no one sees, but still, it was very important. Yeah, we didn't get Televisa or like the mainstream media for sure, but we got the government channel to be there. The sessions were open, but most important, the people bargaining there was voted in the assemblies. It was voted by the rank and file, but most important than everything, they didn't have the power to sign anything without getting it back to the assemblies. They didn't have that power, you know? So, and that's why the strike was so long. It was so long because they couldn't lift it off with maneuvers. That's why the military police had to take off the university, right? So the decision making was very, very important. Now, and once we made a decision as the General Council, we would push together, okay? Now, how does this happen, guys, in a process of struggle, in a process that it has its own politics, right? Assemblies are not disconnected from politics. They are not bodies that represent in general, right, the opinion of the rank and file, okay? Because the student movement, as any, in Mexico, guys, the student movement, I was counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, had 6 important major struggles since 1968 to now. It's a very powerful student movement. In 1968, for example, the student movement played the role of the sector of society that was pushing against the authoritarianism of the PRI. It became a very central agent, okay? So the politics on those days of the student movement were marked by the fact that the main important student organization was linked to the government of the city. On those days, the government of the city was in the hands of a party that in Spanish is called PRD, Partido de la Revolución Democrática. It's a party that is in total bankruptcy right now because they were politically responsible of the Ayotzinapa disappearance of the 43 students in 2014, okay? So it went to political bankruptcy. The PRD was the new democratic opposition to the authoritarian government, and they got to win the city, okay? So on those days, the vast majority of the left, the vast majority of the unions, the vast majority of the people were supportive of the PRD, okay? The PRD had a student organization inside the university that was very big, okay? But this student organization, by 1999, was still relevant and was still the leadership of the student movement, but people didn't trust them that much because in 1987, they led a strike that didn't go well at all. So in many ways, the fact that the chancellor could try to impose the fees, it's a result of that strike that didn't go well, and people felt that this leadership betrayed the strike, okay? But still this leadership was very prominent, okay, in the movement. Well, this leadership was part of the assemblies as well, okay? But what happened? And they had representatives, sometimes they had a bunch of delegates from the assemblies because people trusted them, right? They had an organic connection with the government of the capital, an organic connection, okay? These people, guys, were, and they were also part of the government of the university. This is a party that was growing and had political representation in the bodies of the university, in Congress, in capital, and all that. Now, of course, the student movement, within the process of a strike, we started radicalizing, right? So, for example, for instance, an anecdote, because hopefully one day I could give you more very fun anecdotes from that period, but not today. But for example, the General Council decided that we were going to march, we're going to shut down the main road that circulates, that circles the city. We call it periférico, okay? I don't know if there's a similar thing in New York, but imagine the main road that, circles the Mexico City, and if you shut it down, everything is just a fucking mess, okay? So it was very important. So we marched, we decided to shut down the periférico, and the repression it had been increasing already by that time, but that day the repression was incredibly harsh, okay? Incredibly harsh. So next day, even the press that was supporting the government, they had to show, there's a picture that I couldn't bring today, but there's a picture of this girl from one of the high schools, 15 years old girl, that is just beaten on the ground by the police while blood is spreading. And his brother had to cover her up from the kicks of the police, right? So the movement started to break a sector of the movement started to break politically with the student representation of this party and with this party itself. You know what I'm saying? And they had a lot of power in the student movement. So I wanted to stop here on the politics because the movement at that point was divided between what the media called ultras. We were the ultras because we were intransigent. We didn't want to lift up the strike. even when they had to step back from the fees, we wanted to have the university council, Congress, before lifting up the strike, because we didn't trust them. And we wanted a Congress that was democratic, okay? So we started this process. So yes, the people started radicalizing by that, okay? Because the center-left government was repressing, because these people wanted to leave the strike no matter what. They started to leave the strike. They started to establish a bargaining with the authorities and all that. And the movement was divided between two wings, the moderates and the ultras, okay? That doesn't mean within the ultras, guys, there was a bunch of people, rank and file people, that they didn't want to leave the strike because they wanted to go further. And there was a lot of political organizations. One thing that is very important about the assemblies, guys, the assemblies were not against the political organizations. The political organizations are the natural spaces where people with similar agendas and ideologies and platforms get together. People have the right, the student movement has the right to organize politically. Now, the thing is, behind those organizations, there are different strategies, even for the movement to develop. But the relationship between having these two spaces, if you will, already organized activists with experience, etc., and self-organization allows the rank and file, these organizations to be accountable, and the rank and file to develop politically, listening these organizations to fight with each other. We used to fight a lot. When the division happened between moderates and ultras, guys, the political force was very high because they were the branch of the government within the movement. So the fight against this branch of the, where they were like kicking us, you know, where like, we used to like joke a lot, the democratic beating of this democratic police, very democratic, because they would beat the shit out of us. And they were part of this party, okay? So the political breakup was happening, and the confrontations were real. Most of the organizations that were part of the moderates left the struggle, and then within the ultra wing, of course, other organizations had different politics. For example, different politics from the politics. I was part of an organized organization on those days. The Zapatistas, they didn't leave the movement, but they had a student branch, and on those days, the Zapatistas supported the PRD, for example. Why the Zapatistas supported the PRD? Why some left organizations were like trying not to break up with the PRD? Why? Because the democratic transition was happening in Mexico, okay? So people felt that it was more important to go to this very gradual transformation of Mexico and so on and so on. To be honest, guys, once that the PRD became itself like the political responsible of what happened in Ayotzinapa, I think the history gave us the right. But this confrontation with the mothers was very important, guys, because it developed a sector that was politically independent from the government. There's the strength of a student movement relies on how independent it is from the political parties in power, from the agendas of their political parties, etc. And on the other hand, and I'm going to finish with this idea, and I know there's a bunch of like dark holes in the middle, but I hope the questions can help me, right, to understand where are you coming from and what are the things that you're more interested. But the other things about the politics is that we fought a lot for the student movement not to see itself as a movement for reforms in the university. We fought a lot for the student movement to politicize itself and to see that the struggle goes beyond the university. So, for example, we would push for the General Council of a Strike to demonstrate against the Balkan War, and we would go to the U.S. Embassy. I remember we organized this extraordinary demonstration outside the U.S. Embassy when the Seattle battle happened. I don't know if you're familiar, as guys, but for my generation, that was very important, the anti-global movement, because it was the first movement with all its limits more loud against neoliberalism and corporations and IMF and so on. So we would go to mobilize there. And there was a sector of the movement that was trying to put forward the perspective of unifying the student movement with the working class, because as much as we understand that the student movement is a key agent in like social transformation, we were very aware, we were aware that in order to transform radically an authoritarian country ruled by a single party, we were going to need the strength of the working class. We wanted to follow the revolutionary example of, for example, the students in Indonesia those days were the forefront of the struggle against a dictatorship, the dictatorship of Suharto, and they were able to throw him down. He fell by the. So we were very eager to see the student movement injecting energy into the working class. So in this, I think one of the most important lessons, and I hope you can keep this in mind ahead, there's no, we need to unify the struggle for a free Palestine with the struggle for a better contract and a free CUNY. We should not understand the student movement as we understand sometimes the working class fighting for bread and butter's demands, but as a social movement that is powerful enough to inject energy to the whole working class. Mm-hmm.